The $7 million airport heist that still haunts investigators. The warehouse was ice cold, the kind of cold that stung your fingers even through thick gloves. The air smelled like oil and metal, and outside the heavy walls you could hear the deep thunder of airplanes leaving JFK Airport. Inside, it was quiet, too quiet, except for the sharp sound of zippers closing and the heavy breathing of 6 masked men. On the floor, a guard sat with his back pressed against a steel crate. His hands shook in the air, his eyes wide with terror. His flashlight had rolled out of reach and lay on its side, casting a thin beam across the concrete floor. That beam of light stopped at the piles of money, millions of dollars wrapped in neat plastic bricks, stacked high like a wall of temptation. The leader of the crew, tall and steady, raised one gloved hand. "Keep moving. Fast. We're almost done." His voice was low but firm, like he had been waiting his whole life for this moment. One by one, the men stuffed the bundles of cash into black duffel bags. The bags grew so heavy they sagged and strained at the seams. $7 million. That was the count. 7 million in hard currency, money that didn't belong to them, money that would never be forgotten by the law. Every second felt like forever. Their breaths came out in little white clouds, fogging up the inside of their masks. The guard whimpered under his breath, praying silently that he'd live to see another day, and then it happened. From the far corner of the warehouse, near the side door that was supposed to stay locked, came a sound. A slow, dragging creak. Like a hinge giving way. Every man froze in place. Even the leader stiffened, his hands still hovering in midair. The only sound now was the guard's shallow breathing. The door opened an inch. Then another. A shadow stretched across the floor, long and sharp under the beam of the fallen flashlight. Someone was there. Watching. One of the men dropped a bag, the thud echoing through the warehouse. The guard gasped, covering his mouth with trembling hands, and in that moment, the entire heist, weeks of planning, the risk of their lives, and $7 million in cash, balanced on a knife's edge. What happened next would change everything. Months earlier, the story had started in a far less exciting place. In a cramped apartment in Queens, a man named Richard Carter sat at his kitchen table, staring at a pile of bills he couldn't pay. The paint on the walls was chipped. The fridge hummed loudly, half empty. Outside the window, he could hear car horns and shouting from the street below. Richard rubbed his forehead with one hand, the other clutching a letter from a debt collector. Past due. Pay immediately. Threats of repossession and court action lined the page like cold warnings. Richard wasn't a bad man. He had once been an airport worker, a loader who spent long nights hauling cargo onto planes. He had worked hard, but the pay was low, and when the company downsized, he was one of the names cut from the list. Since then, he had scraped by on odd jobs, painting houses, delivering packages, even driving a taxi for a while. But the bills never stopped. The rent kept rising. And the calls from collectors grew louder, like wolves circling closer. Most nights, Richard fell asleep on his worn-out couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering how his life had slipped so far from what he once hoped. He dreamed of owning a small business, maybe a diner or a car shop. But now those dreams felt like a cruel joke. Every morning was the same routine: wake up tired, drink cheap coffee, chase money he didn't have. It was at a neighborhood bar that everything changed. Richard was hunched over a beer when a familiar voice broke through the noise. "Carter? Is that you?" He turned to see Tony Alvarez, an old co-worker from the airport. Tony looked different, sharper, more confident, wearing a leather jacket that seemed too new for someone struggling. They shook hands, and before long, Tony leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You still remember how the shipments work at JFK, right?" Richard frowned. "Shipments? You mean the money runs?" Tony nodded slowly, a sly smile spreading across his face. "There's a hole in the system, Richie. A way in. If we play it right, we can walk away with millions." At first, Richard laughed. He thought Tony was joking, just another bar story told by a man with too much whiskey in his glass. But Tony wasn't smiling now. His eyes burned with the kind of hunger Richard recognized, the hunger of someone desperate enough to take any chance. For days, Richard tried to forget the conversation. He told himself it was madness. But the thought stuck in his head like a song he couldn't turn off. Every time he opened a new bill, every time the landlord banged on his door, the idea seemed less insane. When Tony called him again, Richard picked up. The plan came together piece by piece. Richard met the rest of the crew in hidden spots, back rooms of diners, dim basements, parked cars under broken streetlights. There was Michael, a broad-shouldered man who used to work security but had been fired after a scandal no one dared to mention. David, quiet and calculating, who seemed to remember every detail of every plan like a human blueprint. And a couple of others, faces Richard barely knew at first but who would soon feel like family in the strangest way. Then Tony revealed the ace in the hole. His name was Daniel. He worked the late shift at the airport's cargo warehouse. Daniel wasn't greedy. He was scared. He had his own debts, his own troubles. Tony had convinced him there was no way out but through. With Daniel's help, they would know everything, the shipment schedule, the guard rotations, the blind spots in the cameras. It felt unreal. Like a movie. But as the weeks passed, his plan grew clearer. Richard found himself rehearsing his role over and over in his head. He was no longer just a man drowning in debt. He was part of something bigger, something dangerous, something that could change his life forever, but with that came fear. Every day, Richard felt the tension coil tighter inside him. The sound of sirens in the street made his stomach drop. A knock on the door made his heart race. He couldn't tell anyone, not even his family. The weight of the secret pressed down on him. Still, the lure of $7 million was stronger than fear. The night of the heist arrived like a storm. The crew gathered in a quiet lot, dressed in black, their faces hidden behind masks. The air was thick with nerves. Richard's hands shook as he pulled on his gloves. "This is it," Tony whispered. "No mistakes." The van rolled through the night, the city lights flashing past. Richard sat in the back, staring at the duffel bags that would soon hold the fortune. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might explode. When they reached the airport warehouse, everything moved like clockwork. Daniel had done his part. The guard was caught off guard, forced to the floor without a fight. The cash was there, stacked higher than Richard had ever imagined. For a few minutes, it almost felt easy. Too easy, until the door creaked. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. Every man froze. The bags of money hung in their hands, heavy with promise. The guard's eyes darted toward the shadow stretching across the floor. Someone was at the door, and just like that, everything they had built, every plan, every desperate hope, was about to unravel.